Manipulators rarely advise you to seek new and diverse information or to learn and research for yourself. It tends to be safer for exploitative and irresponsible leaders to keep their citizens in the dark. In their view, less independent thought is better. Independent thought leads to an inquiring mind, a mindset that eventually leads to the questioning of authority figures, and that is the one thing that inadequate leaders do not want. When a leader discourages questioning of his or her leadership style, actions and motivations, that is a sign that they have something to hide, that they may not be worthy of the public's trust. A responsive leader welcomes and encourages questions from the citizens that have entrusted them with their safety, economic stability, and their confidence that a certain level of civility in society will be constant. Responsive leaders would be appalled, disappointed, and disgusted if the public did not question such factors. I've had a few conversations with people who are asking me to explain how money is created, where money comes from. And I'd like to touch on that a little bit today, actually. And to do so, I can really think of no better way of explaining it than to read a short passage to you from a book that was written by a friend of mine called Thomas Anderson. The book is called Classified, the book governments and banks don't want you to see. And I'll just read you a short passage from that, which does a very good job of explaining exactly what happens when you go and take out a loan. And what Thomas says in the book here is, since there is no lawful money, gold or silver in circulation backed by anything of value, the governments and the banks, as well as you and I, are essentially bankrupt. The little pieces of paper circulating in place of money, affectionately called currency, are in reality debt notes and worthless. What usually happens in a loan situation is that the borrower is established, being the all capitals legal fiction person, the straw man, and then the principal creditor for the straw man, namely you, enters into a loan contract with the bank, with the assumption being that the bank is going to give you some of its money, for which service you agree to pay them back over a period of time plus interest. However, what really happens is that the bank monetizes your instrument, the contract with your signature, and turns it into a credit in its books, essentially a bookkeeping entry as a liability. A liability means it owes you something, and it uses this newly created credit on its account, which is no more than ones and zeros on a computer, to then create a check or deposit those fictional digits into your account. So, if you created the money, then why do you have to pay back a loan if they never loaned you anything? Exactly. And I couldn't have said it better than that, folks, and that very much sums up exactly what happens when you go to the bank to take out a loan. So you see, you didn't actually enter into a contract with the bank. What you did was you created a promissory note with your signature on it. For a start, in order for it to even be a valid contract, it would need to bear two signatures, being your signature and the signature of the bank. But it doesn't bear two signatures, it only bears your signature. So you have essentially gone into the bank and you've created a promissory note. You've created paper money to the value of whatever you signed the promissory note to be. It might be $50,000 or $100,000 or whatever. And then the bank takes that promissory note from you and they change it into their paper, so that you now have their paper, the debt notes that we pass around in our society. And because you are using their paper, they trick you into giving it all back to them. But really it's your money. They didn't create it, you did. And this works virtually the same for governments, folks, only instead of the governments creating a promissory note in the form of a so-called contract, what they do is they use their own paper. They get pieces of paper and they put fancy little decorations on them, and they call them government bonds. And then they take them over to the bank and they exchange it for the bank's paper, and the bank again charges them interest for using the bank's paper. I mean, for all intents and purposes, we could be passing government bonds around to each other, but we don't. We use the paper that is issued by the banksters, and that costs money, a lot of money. See, this was the significance, as I mentioned last week, of Christ overturning the tables of the money changers. And notice the term used in that confrontation is money changers. It's not bankers, it's money changers. You see, And Christ wasn't worried about things like fractional reserve banking. He was concerned that the money changers were changing money into their paper and forcing people to use their paper, which effectively launders all of that money back into the possession of the bankers, plus interest, because they attach interest to their paper. And the only thing that's ever produced, of course, is the principal. The interest never exists. It's never put into circulation. So it's therefore impossible to pay back. This is what keeps society always at each other's throats, always looking for ways to profit from each other in order to find that money to pay off that interest. But even so, the interest can never be repaid because money is created as debt and only the principal is ever created. So essentially, if everybody tried to pay off every dollar that they owe on every bill that they owe, there would be absolutely no money in circulation and the country would still be in debt because, as I said, the interest never exists. But essentially what I'm attempting to say here is that the people create the money themselves when they take out a loan. There is no loan from the bank. There never was any loan from the bank. They are simply changing your paper into their paper and then laundering all of the money that you created back into their possession. And there lies the inherent evil of the money changers. And as I said last week, folks, this system of laundering people's promissory notes into their own possession and attaching interest to the very money itself is one of the most corrupt, one of the cruelest, and one of the most evil crimes that has ever been perpetrated upon the human race. It is this manipulation of the economic system that has kept people in a constant state of hardship, has caused people to work their entire lives simply in a vain attempt to keep their head above an endless ocean of self-generating debt, only to find that at the end of their lives they have virtually nothing to show for it, has been responsible for starting countless wars, has reduced countries to the state of the third world, and has been responsible for the death of quite literally millions upon millions of innocent people. And if that were not bad enough, one of the most disturbing parts about the entire situation is that these facts are well known and that this system of financial slavery is promoted by our governments simply by their failure to ever address the issue. And it's also a very clear indication of who these governments actually work for. And folks, it's certainly not the people. The monetary system is truly one of the most misunderstood and most taken for granted institutions in our entire society. Money is something that we all use every day, and yet very few people ever really take the time to think about where this stuff actually comes from and what gives it value. In fact, it really is surprising how taken for granted money is. I suppose it's simply because of the familiarity of the stuff. It's just there, and we just accept that it exists and that it has value. But as I said, the question is, where does it come from? How does it come into being? And how come there is so much of it in circulation? There never used to be that much money in circulation, so where did it all come from? That's the question. And as I've just explained to you, where it comes from is that people create it when they take out loans. I mean, can you really stop and grasp it and see how insidious this money changer scam is? People create money themselves when they go to the bank and fill out promissory notes, but the bank forces them to use the bank's paper and charges them money for using their paper. Then people take this paper, they go out and they buy all sorts of possessions and houses and land and all this stuff, and then they have to pay for it 4 or 5 times over because they're using the bank's paper. And as more and more people take out loans and buy more things and create more money, they put more paper in circulation, so everybody's paper is suddenly worth far less than it was. And all of this paper that's been issued by the bank into circulation all has interest attached to it. But there was only ever the principal that was created. The interest was never created, so the interest doesn't exist. There's this huge interest debt floating around society that can never be paid. So by design, the system eventually implodes, because there isn't enough money in circulation to ever pay off the bills, and so it starts at the bottom, but eventually right up the food chain, everybody defaults on their loans, and all the wealth gets transferred into the hands of the money changers. This is how it works. It's a scam to control all global wealth through the control of money.
Hi, I'm Mike Montagna. How do we fix the pretended economies of the world? If they are just or sufficiently right, why do they require attendance at all? How could just, sustainable economy manifest in the expatriation and destruction of our industry and the loss of 10,000 homes a day, not only now, but a mere 15 years into the first life cycle of the facade we call economy? Why can't we establish justice and rectitude immediately and without cost? What is true economy? What is just economy? What is sustainable economy? Do we have these things, or do we not? If people charged with acting on ostensible answers to these questions have genuine answers for us, why have you not been made fully aware that anything they intend to do is actually solution? Absolute answers to these questions are vital to any self-ruling people, because no people can deliver monetary justice to themselves without the one set of answers which enables them to do so. The answers are not mysteries. They are elementary, readily discerned, and concrete. There is no valid argument against the absolute answers, and there is no deviation from them if we are to achieve an ability to preserve and deserve monetary justice. Nothing could be further, then, from abiding by the vital principles than to suffer the vast present injustices and unfolding failure. For what country or world's industry would fail merely because it refused to understand two fundamental rules far beneath its general technical capabilities, which would otherwise sustain not just its present or past industry, but its full potential to prosper without impediment? What are those two indispensable rules? To understand the answers to these questions and to profit from those answers, the people of the world must give their most serious attention to some underlying process. For there is a cause of the present failures, and we can identify that cause with certainty, or we can never identify or achieve solution. As John Kennedy reminded us, such a problem is man-made. Because such a thing is of our making, we can solve it, if not simply by not doing whatever is the problem. In other words, in any domain of solely human processes, and particularly where the governing principles are so simple, nothing obstructs us from perfecting systems or solution but ourselves or others. Likewise, the engineers of a bridge who must conquer the problems of nature can never build a successful bridge if they never perceive the vital principles. What we are about to demonstrate is that from their beginning, the purported economic systems imposed upon the world can only fail, that they have finite and even determinable lifespans, and that these systems persist only as a matter of intentional abuse of power. Anything less than broad public conviction to unerring understanding condemns us to political and monetary failure. In that interest in unerring understanding, then, diligent people will want to review this material more than once, as its concepts become more clear to you. What you will understand in the end, after taking all of this in, will make even this seemingly challenging introduction obvious. In 1979, I stood alone in advocating an original thesis of inherent monetary failure, that the pretended economies of the world ultimately terminate themselves under insoluble debt, and that there is one and one only integral solution of the categoric faults of these systems.